So we will take up our middle of that paragraph. So what we see is human evolution goes through stages of growth and fulfillment. And we cannot skip these evolutionary cycles. We have to, you see, there are always individuals who go beyond that cycle, the present cycle. But what we are speaking of is the common collective human consciousness. So that's what Aurobindo tells us when he says that during the historic cycle, that means the historic cycle of the human growth, human social growth especially, we cannot skip any of these steps. Because you can really imagine, after all, the divine wants to manifest on every possible level. For the divine just to realize the psychic is not the best thing. He would also like to have beauty manifested, goodness manifested, justice manifested, cleanliness manifested, all the divine qualities, the sweetness of human nature, the compassion of human nature. So when there is the vital, the physical, mental are given their chance to develop and to manifest, the divine manifests through all these levels. So he would take the society through specific levels of growth. That's why he says that in those times, 2,000 to 2,500 years back, human society was still at that level of the vital, physical vital, where we needed war. Well, you may ask the question, we have the wars even now. But today's wars are again the different level. In fact, he would discuss that in the next paragraph, I suppose. You see, today it is not the physical vital wars. Nobody goes to the battlefield with a sword or on a bow and arrow. There is no contact of the physical to the physical. You saw the latest war, America sitting somewhere. They could target in Iraq a particular house number, a particular street, a particular house number. Because of the computers, because of the technology, you don't even face your enemy. So the mind itself kind of projects the weapon, and the computer searches, there's arms, they search exactly the house number. So that is the precision of war today. So where there's no physical and vital involved, but there is more the mental ambition and the vital thing that are involved. So wars are there, but on a different level, based on a different policy. Even now, we have not actually progressed beyond the feasibility of a system of accommodation between conflicting interests, which may minimize the recurrence of the worst forms of strife. And toward this consummation, the method, the approach which humanity has been forced by its own nature to adopt is a monstrous mutual massacre unparalleled in history. A universal war, full of bitterness and irreconcilable hatred, is the straight way and the triumphant means modern man has found for the establishment of universal peace. You see, universal peace, there's an exclamation mark, it's an ironical statement. These are the two world wars that he is speaking of, that a monstrous mutual massacre unparalleled in history. So we have, you see, in those times when there was this Kurukshetra war, it was amongst a few thousands of people. But today's war involves whole nations. You can see the vastness of destruction. In those times when there was a war, people fought each other in a particular battlefield. It's only sometimes especially after the Mughals had occupied the country, that we had these invasions where they looted, destroyed the temples and all that after the victory. But in those wars, the victor would not destroy the city. He would conquer, he would win over a war. Now the whole kingdom, the small kingdom is under him. The kingdom had to pay some penalties, some fees every month, every day, whatever. So the city itself was undisturbed. I mean, the universities or the schools ran as they were, the business ran as it was, people lived as it was. It was only one aspect of society, the Kshatriya aspect, the warrior aspect, which looked after this entire game of war. Rest of the Brahmins, Vaishyas and Shudras, they continued with their life undisturbed. But the modern wars are not so. You see, one little thing happens somewhere and your financial index, what you call IMPEX or whatever it is, the whole market goes down, and then there's a whole hullabaloo in the market, the prices vary, prices go up because there's a war somewhere, petrol has gone up, all the commodities have gone up, Any war affects our entire life. You may be in Kurchukupam, but you get the influence of war that's happening in Jammu and Kashmir. So he would say that even now we are not changed much, but this war has become on a much larger universal scale. A universal war full of bitterness and irreconcilable hatred. And this is what modern man conceives as the means for establishment of the universal peace. That's what they said, a war to end all wars. They thought first war would teach humanity sufficient lesson, but you saw within hardly 30 to 40 years, we went back with a greater war and with a greater massacre. That consummation too founded not upon any fundamental change in human nature, but upon intellectual notions, economic convenience, vital and sentimental shrinking from the loss of life, discomfort and horror of war, affected by nothing better than political adjustments, gives no very certain promise of firm foundation and long duration. So you see, when Kurukshetra happened, what did it result in? There was the establishment of a different order of dharma, righteousness coming in the place of unrighteousness. A new force was released. But here in our wars, call it the World War I or the World War II or the Iraq War or whatever the present wars, India and Pakistan and all that, there's no change of consciousness. There's no putting a replacement of unrighteousness and saying, we are more righteous than the Pakistanis, or Pakistan is more righteous than the Chinese, or the Iraqis are more righteous than the Americans, or the Britishers are more righteous than the Iraqis. There's no righteousness anywhere. It has become a matter of, he says, intellectual notions, economic convenience, and vital and sentimental shrinkings from the loss of life. So Sri Aurobindo is mentioning exactly what we are talking about, economic convenience. It is much more economically convenient to go to war than to be at peace. Convenient from the point of view of economic growth. You can see the fallacy where we have arrived at. If you want to grow in your economy, you go to war. That is the economic convenience. Upon intellectual notions, we say no, the world should be democratic and we are the godfathers of democracy. So if you are not a democratic country, I come and crush you and bring you democracy. Those are intellectual notions we compel. So we do not know if Iraq is really meant for a democracy at all. You see, each country has its own nation soul. In fact, we saw in Sri Aurobindo's comments itself that India too is not meant for democracy. That is not our ideal, given by our ancient social political structure. Democracy is a modern ideal borrowed from the West and stamped upon India. So the Indian nation soul is not prepared for democracy. But it doesn't mean it is underdeveloped or non-developed. But it may have an alternative which is much better than democracy. So Sri Aurobindo in one of his messages would say, democracy has come to India so that it works itself out and shows the fallacy of democracy. And I think, thanks to our politicians, they are already showing us the stupidity of democracy in India. So you see how history changes, how forces come into thing. So we cannot universalize one democracy that all the nations, 162 nations in the UNO must be democratic. That uniformity cannot be there in this world. However good may be the ideal of democracy, you cannot impose it on every country because every country has a different nation soul. It wants to be ruled in a different way. Go to Thailand. You see the king there, and I've been there in 3 years and I know what it means. There's no democracy there. There is a kind of a social democracy and all that, political democracy. But the monarch is the important one, the king. And friends, the king is really a king there. He doesn't rule on an everyday basis, but when there's any problem, the king intervenes. And his word is the last word. And the country is prospering, progressing very well. They have their own problems, I do not deny that. Now what I want to give you example is that democracy is not necessarily a universal principle. Because if it is, then this universal variation is lost. And in the world, there can never be uniformity. Uniformity is death of a country, of a nation, of a culture, of an individual. So we have to understand that this question of the intellectual notions is a thing on which we have been fighting, but it's not all that, golden, is not a golden principle. So, but modern wars have fought on this, not upon any fundamental change in human nature, but upon intellectual notions, economic convenience, vital and sentimental shrinkings from the loss of life, discomfort and horror of war, affected by nothing better than political adjustments. You see what a horrendous human nature it is. After the first war, after so much of killings and deaths, we have had so many horror of war, so many horrors of war. What did it result? In a few political adjustments. The League of Nations was formed. The Six Nation theory came in. But Aurobindo, while it was being formed, predicted it will not last. It came to birth, and Aurobindo wrote in this area, is a thing that will not last at all. Because it's on the wrong principle. You see, Aurobindo is a great social philosopher. And he said this is a wrong principle on which it is based. Because if amongst all the nations, 6 nations were to dominate, then we come back to square one. So instead of 2 countries dominating the world, there are 6 countries dominating the world, and the rest of the countries are only stooges or slaves. So he said this will not work, and so it did not. So we went back. After this political adjustments, we went back to Second War. And we brought in the United Nations. But again, United Nations has wrong policies. This question of these 5 permanent groups, as if the world is their stooge. They don't want to expand, they don't want to let other countries coming in, they say, no, we are the powerful thing. So anywhere, this kind of a concentration on power will lead to the fallacy also. So Aurobindo would predict the problems, the failure, the possible failures of UNO if it runs this way. So he says, this is what is the present situation. Then he says, a day may come and must surely come, we will say, when humanity will be ready spiritually, morally, socially for the reign of universal peace. Meanwhile, the aspect of battle and the nature and function of man as a fighter have to be accepted and accounted for by any practical philosophy and religion. The Gita, taking life as it is and not only as it may be in some distant future, puts the question how this aspect and function of life, which is really an aspect and function of human activity in general, can be harmonized with spiritual existence. Such a practical advice. You say, yes, one day we will reach a universal peace. That we make and have this kind of a, peace and harmony. One day we will have. But meanwhile, we have to accept that this question of man as a fighter have to be accepted and accounted for by any practical philosophy. So if Gita were to say, no, tomorrow, after 200 years there's going to be peace, so we should not fight now, it was impractical. So what is important is that Gita taking life as it is and not only as it may be in some distant future. This is where there is a conflict between the idealist and the pragmatics people. Idealists say, no, this is what is going to happen in Aurobindo. This is what Aurobindo represents. It wants to become. That's a great ideal. But are we ready for that ideal now? Are we ready means not from the point of aspiration, but on the pragmatic level of our human nature. Have we become non-egoistic? Are we really trying to be spiritual? Are we really practicing yoga in its fullness? And how many people know about the yoga, integral yoga? So you see, idealism is one, but practicality is another. But at the same time, you cannot separate the two and say, oh, the spirituality will come after 300 years, so today let us be as vital as possible. No. As it is said, a journey of 1,000 steps starts with the first one. I know after 300 years Aurobindo will happen or supramental will happen, but if we just sit down or kill each other, go into terrorism, it may not happen. So what Aurobindo is telling here is that Gita tries to harmonize this question of the function of life with the spiritual existence. So now the question of the Gita is how best to be spiritual in this present world. The present world which is full of vital, full of the strife, full of war, full of disharmony. It is not fully spiritual, but how best can we harmonize that? That is the ideal that the Gita gives. That is the ideal that Aurobindo follows. That in this present human consciousness, and I keep quoting Aurobindo because that's a fantastic example of a cross-section of human consciousness. So here, even in the ashram at Pondicherry, we don't have such a cross-section because 99% they are Indians here. It's not a cross-section. But in Aurobindo, we have a wonderful cross-section of human consciousness. So that is the present reality of humanity. And how into that reality can we bring in yoga or spiritual existence? So if the attempts grow, one day the tendency would be more spiritual and less material. Today the tendency is more material and less spiritual. So, but it is this attempt. So we can never say that we have to stop our functioning or trying to grow spiritual, but at the same time, let's not be idealistic and say that will come, so we should be like this. You be what you have to be now. Next he would say, now this is the paragraph I was referring to. Now we come, see, after having seen a bit of the background about the same question of war and peace and the present human consciousness, now he comes specifically to man, the battle of life, that is part of the title of the chapter. Battle of life we have covered. Now he is coming to the man, the Kshatriya, the warrior of this world. The Gita is therefore addressed to a fighter, a man of action, one whose duty in life is that of war and protection, War as a part of government for the protection of those who are excused from that duty, debarred from protecting themselves and therefore at the mercy of the strong and the violent. War. So, now we appreciate the Gita much more. Gita is not given to a devotee or to a jnani, but to a kshatriya. Because Gita believes that this war and strife is the principle of life now, how can a human being live in this war-torn life, in this Kurukshetra of life? So it is not just by devotion, it is not just by knowledge. So because the one who is fighting this war is a kshatriya, is a warrior. So Gita directly addresses Arjuna and not Bhishma Pitama, who is supposed to be the wisest man around. Of course, Bhishma was a kshatriya also, but the real fighter in the field is Arjuna. So it is addressed to a kshatriya whose duty is to protect, and protect also by war if necessary. But what is the duty of a kshatriya? To protect the society through war or no war. But he is the protector of those who are excused from the duty. Like the Brahmin, he is not supposed to go to war field, or the Shudra, or the Vaishya. They were debarred, in fact. They were not even allowed to join the army. You had to be a kshatriya to join the army. Of course, present times it has all changed. Anybody can join the army. But they said no, it's a kshatriya who should come in. And you'll see the importance. And secondly, and by a moral extension of this idea, for the protection of the weak and the oppressed, and for the maintenance of right and justice in the world. So the kshatriya was not only a warrior, but one who gives justice, who protects and brings in the question of right and justice in the world. So that is his dharma, his bounden duty. In fact, this is how society was divided, as most of us know. So each one was given a particular duty. And it has its own advantages and disadvantages. The advantages was, of course, as we have seen, you don't have to bother about other things. If you wanted to go to war, there were kshatriyas who says, hey, look after the boundaries of the kingdom. But if you wanted pujas and ceremonies, you didn't have to learn all the Vedas and the Upanishads and all that. You just call a Brahmin and said, hey, that's your duty, please do the ceremonies at home. If you wanted wealth, the Brahmin doesn't have to earn money, he is bothered with the Vedas and the Upanishads and the temples and the pujas. We go to the Vaishya. He earns the money, the wealth for the community, for the enrichment. And for the labor, the Brahmin is not even fit to work physically. He is fit to work mentally. So his body is not, even now we see, if there is something heavy to be lifted in Sakar, we call a labor. We don't work. It's not that we cannot, but we say, no, heavy thing, I cannot lift, my muscles are not trained. But it's not that it cannot be in the ashram when we are younger. We should do all that. There's no question of Brahmin or not Brahmin. You are young, you are supple, you are strong enough. We did all the work. So it is this question that has changed now. But in those days, skilled labor, money, then Brahmins, and then the Kshatriyas. So this was what was the division of the society, very conveniently divided. You see, later on, it became something else. But the initial idea was a wonderful, like in any company, you have the managing director, you have the direct executive directors, you have the skilled labor, you have this daily workers. You don't say in a company that you are doing the wrong thing. Why do you have an executive and why do you have the skilled labor? Why do you have the experts? Because this combination of this different hierarchy of people is what makes a company healthy or going or profiting. So Indian society was given this kind of a health, as a general health, by each one dividing his role. So we don't bother. So here the Kshatriya was given the role of protecting the weaker sections, bringing right and justice. And he said, for all these ideas, the social and practical, the moral and the chivalrous enter into the Indian conception of the Kshatriya, the man who is a warrior and ruler by function and a knight and king in his nature. Although the more general and universal ideas of the Gita are those which are the most important to us, we ought not to leave out of consideration altogether the coloring and trend that take from the peculiar Indian culture and social system in the midst of which they arose. That system differed from the modern in its conception. Now there is a little comparison with the modern man. To the modern mind, a man is a thinker. It's a very interesting analysis. Worker or producer and a fighter all in one. And the tendency of the social system is to lump all these activities and to demand from each individual his contribution to the intellectual, economical, military life and needs of the community without paying any heed to the demands of his individual nature and temperament. So for once we understand why we, the modernists, are what we are. You see, there's so much of, we say, tension. And you take up any newspaper, any journal, there are dozens of institutions and centers. We say, you have a tension? I will take it out. Somebody says this therapy, somebody says that therapy, somebody says meditation, hundreds of things to take away your tension. Now this could be one of the causes, as Sri Aurobindo is describing here, of this so-called tension of the modern man. Because he doesn't have a cut-up duty. You see, if you know that you are a Brahmin, you are a Kshatriya, you are a Shudra, you have one role to play in the society, then you have less tension because you have got a defined role and work. And basically, that is because it is going according to your nature and temperament. You see, to give a bad example, see, if I am supposed to be a teacher here, and then if I have to become the Vaishya of turn, trying to earn money for the Sakar or for the new building, then if I have to be a Shudra trying to, help the people lifting up the cement bars and all that. And also if I have to be a Kshatriya trying to defend the Sakar against these people or that thing. So what happened? There are 4 roles coming into my being, and that creates a tremendous tension. Just tell me, Ananda Reddy, you just keep teaching. We will look after the rest of the things. Some big firm says, building, my affair. You just keep teaching, you are brilliant in that, go ahead. My tension would be definitely less. You see, when I go into the morning administration, I'd look into the accounts, and that's the most tension. Because you have to account for every pie, make out every little receipt, and I say, hey, Satya, have you given that receipt? You see, my mind is working on the receipts and the accounts and 501. Sometimes a little money comes on the offering, so again the offering, I have to make a special. So this is the function of the Vaishya. So I have to play the role of the Vaishya, I have to play the role of the Brahmin, I have to play the role of the Shudra. So one of the things that Sri Aurobindo is telling us is that the modern man is supposed to be a thinker, worker or producer and a fighter all in one. So why shouldn't a man have tension? Obviously. You work in the company, then you are supposed to do the thinking part, then come home, you have to earn the money for your family, and then you have to do also the fighter, you have to, there are problems in the society, you go to the police station, there's a corrupt police station, everything. And so we have tremendous tension. Why? Because you are cut out for one temperament, swabhava, as we said. So I'm going against my swabhava So obviously I'll land up in tension. If you are swimming against the current, what happens? You have a lot of labor. If you are swimming with the current, it's easy. You swim. There's no tension. You enjoy the swimming. Sometimes the current of water is strong. Doesn't matter. You are swimming with the waters of your Swabhava. But here, I'm swimming against the Swabhava. So the poor man is bound to land up in tension, and no amount of therapies, I'm sorry to say, or all these advertisements can help you. So I think here I suddenly find that once long back in Aurobindo, mother had given a notice that Aurobindo will be a place where each one finds a work that suits his own temperament and nature. I mean, these are not the exact words, but something like that. I remember the Gita. So now we see the eternal value of the Gita, that if you work according to your Swabhava, then there's no tension, then there's growth, there's realization, there could be transformation. So how do we make this life back to this question of Swabhava? We are not hitting at the root problem with all this, advertisements and great people saying, I have this therapy and that therapy. So now you see the value of Swabhava. I mean, these are the root concepts which we have forgotten, and we say, hey, I have to deal with money, I have to deal with accounts, I have to. Well, who said I have to? Because our structure has become so different, and we have not obeyed to that ancient wisdom that is in the Lord, in the Gita. So he says, we have to have all this social system lumped all these activities and to demand from each individual his contribution to the intellectual, economical, military life. So obviously we are pulled. What is the meaning of tension is? We are pulled from different sides, so that our mind is pulled for economy, for this, for maintenance, for health, for job, you satisfy your boss. Whereas in the ancient system, you had tensions, of course there will be human tensions in your own line. If I am a teacher, if I am a Brahmin, then learning and understanding and Aurobindo, I have to look 10 different books. There's a tension in my work itself. But I am not pulled apart from different Swabhavas or different demands on my Swabhava. So there are difficulties, but here your being is pulled apart. That is the main problem. The ancient Indian civilization laid peculiar stress on the individual nature, tendency, temperament, and sought to determine by it the ethical type, function, and place in the society. Nor did it consider man primarily as a social being or the fullness of his social existence as the highest ideal, but rather as a spiritual being in process of formation and development, and his social life, ethical law, play of temperament, and exercise of function as means and stages of spiritual formation. So sound, so beautiful. That how our Indian system had a different conception of human being. You see how in the modern times we have gone almost away from any kind of a spiritual balance. Why? With a single stress on the concept of man. And this is very essential, because on the concept of your understanding of man, your entire social system is hanging on the concept. If man is today a kind of a social being, or the fullness of his social existence as the highest ideal. So the moment you say man is a social being, what happens? So everywhere you have got to please the society, please this question of social existence, you have got to be the manager. If you are the manager, you have got to throw parties. If you have to throw parties, you have got to have drinks in that. If you have got to drinks, blah, blah, blah. So your ideal is success, If you have less money, you cannot be successful. Even the definition of success changes. 20 years back, to have a lakh of rupees, you say, wow, I am a lakpati. Today, who talks of lakhs? Nothing short of a crore. So if you have a crore of rupees, then you say you are rich. If you say 50 lakhs, oh, is an ordinary man. So the definition of success itself undergoes change, and it brings you more stress. Somebody is earning 30,000 a month, 5 years back was a very good salary. Today all these IT companies, IIT companies and people, nothing less than 1 lakh a month. That's the minimum. So if he is earning 1 lakh, what about the chap who earns 1,500 rupees or 2,000 rupees? So he will look, I'm poor. There's a psychological poverty that has been created because of this notion of success. Well, I'm dealing with all this because the notion of man, the concept of man is so very important. Now change this definition to what? That man is a spiritual being. In fact, if some of you have been to Aurobindo Eye Hospital, if you haven't been, and if you go in the future, near one of the staircases on the ground floor, you will see a beautiful quotation. It says, man is a spiritual being trying to be human, and not a human being trying to be spiritual. Wonderful. That's the right concept. That's exactly what we have in Aurobindo, that he is a spiritual being in the process of formation and development and his social life, ethical law, etc. So he is a spiritual being manifesting himself in the social, ethical and different function, and he uses them as stages of spiritual formation. So you see, that is value of Indian spirituality. That is the unfortunate definition of the modern concept that man is a social animal, man is a social being, and so the whole definition has changed. So what Aurobindo is telling us is, once again, unless we change the concept of man, social system will not change. As all the Aurobindonians know that now the concept of man is changed, that man is a psychic being. To realize the psychic being is the primary aim of his life. Instead of saying man is a social being who must have success, who must have money, who must have position, who must have power. This is the old idea or the outside idea. But among the Aurobindonians we say the concept has changed. That you are a soul. Try to realize that. And in the process of the realization, the social, ethical law and etc. are stages. So it doesn't mean you don't do a job. It doesn't mean you don't go to America or to England or to Germany. You do all that, but as stages. Stages of spiritual formation. So you see, I think somebody, or the gentleman just now went away, I think. In fact, he reminded me of something. You see, when, for example, I was supposed to go to USA after my higher course. Oh, you are there. No, then the other person has gone away. You see, when I had written to the mother that I would like to go to USA for higher education, then the mother said, yes. And these are not the exact quotations, but don't quote me like that. She said, if you want success, comfort and success, you go. That's the definition of this successful man today. You want comfort and you want success. Comfort with millions of dollars. If not in the bank, hardly Americans have money in the bank. They've all got, in the material things. Everywhere they have taken, cars and fridges and houses and all that on the loan basis. But everyone is rich. Comfort is minimum there. And success, of course. So you see, if that is the definition of your life, of your being, she says go. But if your definition is that if you want to participate in the new world that is coming, be here and prepare yourself. I mean, I'm not trying to quote anything about me. I'm just trying to give you what is your definition of your life and your aim and the being. If your life is supposed to be a spiritual man wanting to manifest himself, and especially wanting to participate in the new world that is coming down, and it was 1969, and 1st January 1969 was the descent of the new consciousness, and I had written this at the end of 1969. So if you want to participate in the new world that is coming down, stay here. But stay here, it doesn't mean that I was just there keeping cool. But she changed the direction of my understanding of the human values. That is what is most important. Then I said, no, Ma, I'm not going. Because suddenly I realized one definition of man, if it's comfort and success, America is the best place at present. That was 1968, way back, 40 years back almost. Even now it's the same pilgrimage for every young Indian to go to America. Because the definition of man has not changed. But Sri Aurobindo and the mother are trying to change that. But that is not the definition of man, that you want to be a successful man. Today all these schools and colleges tell their students, you must be a successful man. I mean, we din into the ears of our children, success, success, success. But into our ears, it is a soul, a psychic being. Realize your being, realize your being, realize your psychic being. That was what was dinned into our ears. So you see, I'm trying to give you a practical, known example. I'm not quoting anyone else, quoting my own letters. So, but then, trying to be in this new consciousness, I'm manifesting something as part of my stages of my spiritual formation. I do not claim to be spiritual, but we are manifesting something in the form of sakar, in the form of this. So this is so very important to change the definition of man. Thought and knowledge, war and government, production and distribution, labor and service were carefully differentiated functions of society, each assigned to those who were naturally called to it, and providing the right means by which they could individually proceed towards their spiritual development and self-perfection. You see, so I realize more and more the value of Swabhava. We have to teach our children only this: follow your Swabhava. In fact, the whole essence of integral education is what? To put it into this ancient terminology, consult the child in its growth. It is exact translation of follow your Swabhava. Nothing else. I mean, really, if you now go into the Gita psychology and compare with our integral education, you will see so many similarities. So we are not saying we go back to the ancient Indian system, but the valuation is the same. So Gita's value on the Swabhava and cannot be Swadharma and Swabhava cannot be a shallow value meant for only 100 years. It's an eternal value. As long as human being exists, this value holds. So Sri Aurobindo in his own modern way has come back to the same thing. Consult the child. Nothing can be taught. Bring out the knowledge from the child. All these are nothing but Swadharma and Swabhava. If you want to translate that into ancient terms, it's just the same thing. So what Sri Aurobindo is telling us, that this is how our ancient Indian civilization was formed, were carefully differentiated functions of society, each assigned to those who were naturally called to it. You see, naturally called. That is what we are emphasizing on our integral education, that exactly what is it you want? You are a growing child, you want to go to physics, you want to go to mathematics, you want to go to science. I mean, a young niece in my family, she has just passed out of higher course, she has taken to environmental studies. And we said, wonderful, beta, go ahead. But in our whole family history, had it been this so-called the classical and family, what we would have said? Because her from our father's side, father is a lawyer, mother is a lawyer, brothers are lawyer, everybody is a lawyer there, advocates. So they would have said, no, Betty, you take to this kind of, lawyers, and because the whole family belong, that family tradition is that you also follow that. And on the mother's side, that's my sister, we're all this educationists, philosophers, this and that. So we said, no, take this philosophy or education. We said, no, whatever you want. And she was a child of the ashram, she said environmental science. We hardly even know the spelling of that environmental science, both sides of the family, but we said, no, what you want. So this, if it can be inculcated in our children everywhere, we would be doing a lot. And among the Aurobindonians themselves, we are ourselves to be blamed, because I know a lot of Aurobindonians who really say, no, my beta should go to America, do this information technology, earn 6-figure salary. So you see, one thing is we believe, but we do not really practice. When it comes to my own child, no, he must go to America. That's the only place on earth for heaven. So what we now want to understand is change our concepts. I mean, you may think, after all, what does it matter? I have just one daughter and one son, to send them to America. But you are adding the same old ideal. It's nothing big volume wise, but the way you add to the whole valuation, we have failed. So this question, I'm telling you so much in elaboration, because this is a practical reality, and this is what happened in India, that each one was given what was naturally called for it, and providing the right means by which they could individually proceed towards the spiritual development. And of course, if a son wants to become an environmental scientist, you provide him all the help. You find out the best company, best university, best college to give this environmental education, give it her. So there the parents can be of help, but you must first help the child what he wants to do. If he says, Mommy, all right, I'll try this, but I'm not sure, go and try. And this is one thing so excellent in the Western system. The parents hardly choose anything for their children. Right from the beginning, they have the absolute choice. I mean, the father and mother could be something, that the children could be completely different. There's no imposition. So that is why the children are much more confident. They try. They fail, they try. But you see their individualities and our individualities. I mean, oftentimes you see in our own Pondicherry, young girls and boys, in just their teens or early 20s, they've come out to see the world, adventure. Can you imagine your daughter at the age of 19 going to America and walking the streets of New York? Nahi, तुम्हारा भांजा रहना, भाई रहना, uncle रहना, भांजा. Unless you have an uncle or a sister or somebody who will say, beta, take care, my daughter is coming, you receive her at the New York airport, and then from there take her in the taxi and just batana hai, World Tower, you go in. None of those girls here do that. They've just come into our stations, caught down at Chennai. So that gives them this sense of individuality, no fear, because they have decided things for themselves. So that gives them the strength. Here we decided for our children. So all the time we have broken their backbone. We have never let our children be strong individually. So this pampering, these wrong ideals, we have crushed our youngsters. Well, I'm in the education, so I feel pathetic about the whole thing. That's why when I speak about it, it all erupts. So, I've spoken hundreds of times to different parents, and we have our own school at Hyderabad. I keep banging, but hardly a success. In my own school, Aurobindo International School, we have about 80 teachers, but I'm sure 60 of the teachers are trying to send their children abroad. What for? Money, success. So friends, when we speak of evolution and change of consciousness, don't be in a hurry. It's going to take a long time. Mentally, we may all accept, go to Natkani's talk, Anand Reddy's talk, and it's all talk. But to practice it, it'll take time. So when Aurobindo speaks of the supermind, don't think it's around the Kuchukupam corner and you say, there is a supermind, and some people say it's already working in my cells. I say, forget about it. Take it easy. Well, I think I'll not start the next para because that's going to take me to a different argument. We will leave it for tomorrow.